Hello there, Gardens of the Moon. If you want me to give you one single reason to read this book, you have to read it, because if you're a fantasy fan, you definitely have to read the next one, Dead House Gates. Also, it's a good book. Alright, Steven Erikson's Gardens of the Moon. Book 1 in the Malazan Book of the Fallen series, which is behind me. He's a Canadian author of renown for this series, basically because it's a big 10-book fantasy series that was finished on time, and believe me, that's quite a feat for the genre, especially the time it came out in the early 90s. And Malazan Book of the Fallen is often mentioned as a fantasy classic and a must-read for all fantasy fans, and when you ask, I want to read a good fantasy Malazan, someone will go out and say Malazan, and you know what, judging on this book alone, it's easy to see why. To be honest, in retrospect, The Gardens of the Moon is hardly the best book in the series. But this is going to be a non-spoiler review of this book, and this book alone, from somebody who recently reread it. And I've read the entire series once, and I'm doing a reread, and there are some huge sort of note-taking of the books I was reading when I was reading the book that I definitely don't recommend you to watch if you have not read the series yet. If you're thinking of, should I read this book? Yes, you should, and I'll tell you why and what are some of the not that great stuff in this book too. Because let's be honest, Gardens of the Moon is a weird book. It's huge in scope, despite only taking place between two cities in one continent, because it covers a big war between the Empire of Malazan and the city-states of Genabakis, more specific Pale and Darkistan, while also having various groups in both factions and outside it infighting for their own agendas. And a lot of gods come in and mess in this war. So this is probably the closest epic fantasy has come to the Iliad, which means that we have a rich, established world, and we recount an event in a war in this world, like Homer did in the Eps. However, Homer was drawing influences from a big tradition of well-known mythology of ancient Greece. Steven Erikson is drawing on a campaign setting he had made for D&D in the 80s with his friend Ian C. Esselmund, and this is the first writing in this world. So we can see where the problems begin in a way. And to be honest, there is no easy way to explain what the plot is about, because the book does not follow a conventional plot structure about a character who has to undergo a journey to save the world or accomplish something. It's not like that. There is sort of something like that in there, but not quite. I mean, the book starts with a lone fisher girl who is getting possessed by a pair of godlike beings, and she is going to be used as a weapon in the beef these two beings have with the Malazan Empire. And we have a young officer, Ganos Paran, who is recruited by the Malazan Secret Services, the Claw, to track this girl. And years later, she resurfaces in Pale, a city besieged by the Malazan army in the continent of Genabakis, and she's a member of the Bridge Burners, who used to be a former elite military squad of sappers that were loyal to the previous emperor, but the current empress is not that happy that there are these loyalists. And the book begins with some of the old guard of the former emperor's loyalists being killed in a big battle in chapter 2 of this book. So yes, I'm not spoiling anything at the point. We are very early in the events happening, and most of the bridge burners are also annihilated, and as Ganos Paran is going to Pale to assume the leadership of the squad, lots of things happen, and by the time he gets there, the squad is already in Darkistan in a suicide mission of sorts. And yes, gods get involved in many ways, and mages do their own stuff that are not explained, And this is just the first part out of the 7 parts of this book, so you can understand that there's a lot of stuff happening. And then when we get to this point and we have some momentum build, we stop following these characters and we get to the city of Turkestan, and we meet a lot of characters that are there. They have nothing to do with the Malazans, and then the plot flip-flops between those different characters. Gradually it abandons all the subplots involving the Malazan military and gets into the stuff in Turkestan. So this means that the book often fails to gain momentum, and this makes it for a challenging read, because as soon as you have some semblance of a plot emerging out of this, out of the events happening, it is stopped abruptly and we get to something new, and this is a pattern for the entire series. So yeah, that's why people say Malazan is a hard read, because it is, yes, it is, for this reason alone. However, once the storylines start to converge, some plots are resolved or abandoned for now, Malazan gets to be a very gripping read, and the second half of this book actually is great. And we get to some convergence of plots, and the different characters start to meet, interact with each other, and we have some clear stakes and events going to happen. So yeah, it's not that bad. It's not some postmodern abstract fantasy novel, even though there are a lot of postmodernist elements in the entire series by Steven Erikson, and in this book too. Another challenging aspect of this book, and I should definitely mention it, is how a lot of the characters and the situations seem to be already established, and the author seldom goes into a good old-fashioned explanation of what is happening and who is who and what is what. So recently I've read a Reddit post by somebody who, I think it wasn't our fantasy, it was somebody who read this book after buying the entire series, which is a big mistake to do. Never buy an entire series because of the hype. Just get the first book and see if you like it or not, maybe the second, and give it an extra try, or the third first, because most of the times fantasy series get really good on the third book, or they fall apart on the third book. That's my experience reading fantasy series overall. The third book is what will make you decide if you want to continue reading the series or not, but that's a different topic. So he was complaining that I didn't understand anything, and he missed some things explained in this book, because I've also read the book recently and I know where is where and what is what, and there were literally explanations for everything this person has read, and I was like, no, that's not, everything is explained, sort of. And this happens because you have to pay attention when you read this book. There are a lot of information here and they're not, there's nobody pointing to you that yes, this is important. There are a lot of things explained here and there or hinted at, and you have to follow it through. And actually this is what sets this book apart, because reading it is a welcome change of pace, and to be honest, rereading it is also very rewarding, because a lot of things that happen later on, they're foreshadowed here, established here, or certain characters and events are first shown here, and when you meet them later, they feel great. So yes, you have to pay attention, and yeah, if you're reading this book for the first time, you're not expected to understand everything, because I'm pretty sure there are a lot of things that have been never explained in this series, or there are events hinted that will appear in later books or in books that are not written yet. But enough about the plot, because a book is not the plot. We should also talk about the writing, and writing-wise, Steven Erikson is great. I mean, just read the first sentence of this book and tell me if this is not an amazing setting of the setting. Yes, I'd say that Steven Erikson is not a fantasy author, he's a literary writer who happens to write fantasy. His prose is very evocative, it's light on details, but really paints a mood and a picture of everything happening. He has a great sense of humor, and he has a knack for characterization through dialogue. There are many characters, and sometimes you get lost about who is who, but the longer you stay with some of them and you see them talk and interact, the more alive they feel, and more distinct. That's quite a feat, to be honest, in a book of this scope. Yes, I will also complain, as with every Malazan video I've done, I will complain that Steven Erikson cannot exactly get into character heads, and to be honest, some of their actions not make sense, especially in this book. I mean, either because you don't spend enough time with them to know them and know what makes them tick, or listen to their thoughts. For instance, there are two characters in this book that fall madly in love out of nowhere, and it's baffling when it happens, or because you don't know their backstories. And yes, some of them have very long established backstories you're not aware of yet. Also, you might have heard that Malazan is grimdark, but Guardians of the Moon is nothing like grimdark. Other books in the series, yeah, they are grim as fuck, but not this one. Guardians of the Moon is more of a fun adventure, or I'd say it's like a spy thriller that is told in a fantasy setting. There are a lot of sword and sorcery tropes thrown here they're mostly subverted or reused in an interesting way. It feels like it's a spy thriller with many characters and factions and much of intrigue and complexity involved, and we also have some very lively heroes pushing the plot forward, and also we have some amazing action scenes, because let's be honest, if you want to read a book about ancient godlike beings with magical powers that can raise cities to the ground and maybe enslave the god themselves, backing it out with mages and dragons, I've got a book for you. And yes, there is plenty of hardcore magical fighting in this one. You're going to love it. Some of the characters in these books are gods or ancient powerful beings. Yet Steven Erikson has this talent of always returning to the small people and making sure to show you that yes, they're important. The book, Guardians of the Moon, is sort of a standalone. By the end of it, a lot of the arcs of the plot is resolved. We're over with the Darokistan situation, and we also have some hooks for the next two books in the series, because the character is split and we follow different events in the next two books. The direct sequel to Guardians of the Moon is the third book in the series, Memories of Ice. The second book is happening in another continent, following some of the characters from this book. So you kind of see how this, what happens in the first two parts in this book also happens in the entire series. That's why people are often say, oh, it's hard, because there are a lot of shit happening in the series, and seriously, it can get a bit too much at times. So I wouldn't start reading this book one after another. I'll take breaks, and maybe I don't know, even take breaks mid through these books, because some of the books in the series are really big. This is the smallest one. It's only 700 pages long. Yeah, that's adult fantasy for you. Long books. Gods of the Moon is also very philosophically interesting. There's some very profound lines here and there about the nature of being human, about mortality, morality, and all this sort of stuff. And in some ways, the Malazan world is far, far different from our world, or even the world that the characters believe they're in. I mean, we have these ancient, powerful characters that bear the wisdom of their experience. They can feel how they bear this burden of their long lifetimes, their immortality, their experience, and it comes through them. The mortals, on the other hand, they feel less defined. They're not as monolithic as some of the characters that have lived for millennia, but they also feel lively and distinct, and they can be as badass are the powerful immortals, maybe even more badass. If you want some good romances in your books, nope, not this one. The romances in this book are very weak. The bromances, however, the bonds of friendship between characters do shine in this book. There are so many characters that are bonding during their trials, tribulations over sometimes small stuff, and their tensions giving way to trust and camaraderie, and it's done in a sublime way that feels very natural. And that's quite a feat for this style of military fantasy. And while the descriptions of characters are very scant, sometimes you don't know what they look like, what they're like, or you have a couple of descriptions here and there about them. It's interesting how many of the characters are people of color and how many plus-size women there are in this book, because I don't know, I mean, this guy probably likes them thick. It's not weird actually, but it's so prevalent fantasy to have these slim, pretty women that seeing beautiful, larger women is actually a welcome change of pace. And another reminder that diversity was not something created in the zeros or the tens. No, it existed earlier on. And while there are many people of color, it should be mentioned that the different human races in this book, as well as the demi-humans, the non-human races in this world, do not feel like they're analogues of real races or real civilizations. They all are well differentiated takes on some fantasy tropes. For instance, I mean, there are the Moranth. The Moranth are... we're not sure what the Moranth are like, but they feel like dwarves, because they're very lawful, they stick to the letter of their agreements, and they're industrious. They have come up with some concoctions that can explode, and they are like magical explosives. Really, they're weapons of mass destruction. In a world where mages raise down cities, Moranth munitions are like overpowered. So they're dwarven-like, but they're not Scotsman miners. They're completely different. They feel like also they're like the Dark Elves from Morrowind, because they have chitinous armor and they use some huge insects to transport people and goods. So yeah, that's something unique, something you don't quite see in fantasy. Or I mean, there are the Tisteandi, who are definitely Dark Elves, but they're Goth AF. They are Goth Elves. So yeah, that they're not your average fantasy. It's something more than that. It surpasses the limits of epic fantasy, the tropes of epic fantasy. It's subverting it in interesting ways, and that's another reason to read this book. So overall, yes, it's a recommend. It's not an easy read, I'll say it again, and I'll say it again and again. Everybody says that it's not an impossible read, and to be honest, it's not even an easy reread, because yeah, while I was reading it, I was constantly trying to keep track of what was happening, because I was anxious to see, maybe I lost something important, and no, it's not. That's not the point. You just go through there and see this world, explore it, try to piece things together and see where it goes, because it's one of those weird series of books where the destination is not as important as traveling there. You know what? This book definitely is worth the hype, and every fantasy fan should definitely read it at some point. And don't be intimidated by it, it's a fun read. That's what's important. It's a fun, entertaining read. Hope you like this video. Press the like button, subscribe for more. Yes, I'm doing a read of the entire series for the next 2 years. I'm already reading book 2. So I'll try to do these non-spoiler reviews for the entire series, which can get real tricky later on, but whatever. Like, subscribe, and I'll see you soon. Thank you for watching.